Why do we care so much about sports, and how does being a fan affect our lives? Well, a guy who's taken that on is best-selling author Larry Olmsted, who joins us this morning, and he is the author of the new book, Fans, which makes the case that watching sports makes us happier and healthier and more understanding. And he joins us here this morning on WSBA. Larry, great to have you on the show. Good morning to you.
Oh, well, thanks. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you in this morning. Of course, you have this brand new book out, Fans, How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Understanding. Talk a little bit about what kind of got you going on this book.
Yeah, I went to a Red Sox-Yankees game years ago and saw this couple at the game with two very young kids dressed in T-shirts with obscenities aimed at the Yankees. And I left thinking, like, what's wrong with these people? You know, what is it? Is the sports make us crazy? And that way, so I was like, I should research this. There might be an article here. And I dove into the data, and as soon as I did, I realized the opposite was true, that, it's been amply proven that being a sports fan is good for us, makes us happier, healthier. And the reason those two people stood out in retrospect is there was 45,000 other people at the game that I didn't notice, because most sports fans are, normal and happy and well-adjusted. So it got me flip-flopped on the topic, and I've been researching it ever since.
I remember going to an Orioles game one time, and they were playing the Yankees, and people bought these Yankee pennants and then burned them at the stadium. And I used to sit and watch some of this stuff, and I think, it's unbelievable. And and I remember I was at a clinic. Mike Krzyzewski of Duke was talking about this story the first time they played North Carolina, and he said we went in there. He said there was a T-shirt in there. And he said there was a picture on this T-shirt of a big long line, and on one side had a rat, and the other side had a picture of Coach Krzyzewski. And he said he came out to the bus. His wife and his daughters were crying because they saw this T-shirt. And underneath the rat and underneath the picture of Coach Krzyzewski, and it had this line down the middle that said, separated at birth. And he said, wait a minute. He said, that's a great sign of respect. In the guy's world, we understood that as respect. So it's crazy how, as fans, we got all these wild things, and yet at the same time, you're saying there's a lot of good that comes out of it. And one of the things you talk about in your book, experiments that exhibit how sports fans maintain better cognitive and language skills through their lifetimes. What's that all about?
Well, I've come to look at it, as following sports as sort of the equivalent of, doing Sudoku or crossword puzzles.
Okay.
Sports have become much more complicated. I grew up watching baseball, and we just, we knew what the ERA was and RBIs, and now, since Moneyball and these sabermetrics, and there's all these statistics, beyond replacement and, plate discipline plus and things that, are really hard to understand. And then, in the defenses and to call into sports talk radio and criticize, the coach's decision in a football game, well, you have to be able to understand what the cover two defense is and all the options and choices that they had. So, sports has become much more complicated. But in one of those studies, they actually wired people's brains while they watched hockey, and the spectator, their brain behaves as if they're actually participating in the game. So it's like a way to very actively exercise your game your brain while sitting on the couch.
Kind of a psycho-cybernetics kind of thing that, they say your brain doesn't know the difference between a real or imagined experience. And, one of the things that's fascinating to me in this book you have, the findings that prove that college students who follow sports have higher GPAs, grade point averages, better graduation rates, and higher incomes after graduating if they follow sports. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, the key there is really the happiness. So, and that's a lot of the mental health benefits that have been identified with sports fandom, which include higher self-esteem, lower depression, more social connectivity, more friends, come from just this feeling of community that sports fans get, of belonging to something. And particularly when you go off to college, for a lot of people, that's a time of tough adjustment. First time maybe they've lived away from home, all new friends, stress of school. So people who are just happier and better adjusted and more comfortable socially tend to do better. That explains sort of the grades, and then the rest is a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You get better grades, you're more likely to graduate on time, you're more likely to get a good job, and there's also an argument to be made that sports fans probably interview better because they tend to be more extroverted.
We're talking with Larry Olmsted this morning, author of the new book, Fans, which makes the case that watching sports makes us happier and healthier and more understanding. Sports can be the great uniter also. You mentioned your book about how the Las Vegas Golden Knights' first season helped mend the city after that terrible shooting they had in 2017 at that concert, the 1 October shooting. I'm also thinking about after 9/11 when we had the New York Yankees playing the Mets on TV and the throwing out of the first pitch, and I think George Bush came there and Rudy Giuliani, and there was a uniting kind of factor. So sports does have the ability to make us feel better that way a lot of times with a uniting kind of force, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is actually my personal favorite part of the book. I grew up in Queens. I went to Mets games. I once worked in the World Trade Center. So the 9/11 post-game healing really resonated with me. And, one fan, that first Mets-Braves game was I think 9 or 10 days after 9/11. It was the first professional sports game in New York. One fan told me that was the moment when it was okay to clap, okay to smile again. That's pretty powerful. Yeah. And then I got to go out to Vegas and interview people who had been shot at, and one after another, they told me these heart-rending stories of how they would not have gotten through it without the Golden Knights. And I came away from that feeling this isn't frivolous, it's not entertainment. Sports fandom is a vibrant part of the fabric of our lives, and it improves society. And it improves society even if you're not a sports fan. Non-fans don't know this stuff, but sports fandom makes the world a better place to live in.
And we're seeing more and more of the social issues coming out through sports now. It's one of the most visual places we go in the country. And so we see, civil rights issues being out there at the moment. We saw Colin Kaepernick's knee taking a few years ago, and then others too. And, of course, we had all kinds of controversy over that as well. But sports is the place that we go. And we go all the way back to '68 if we want to. And remember Tommy Davis and Juan Carlos raising their fists at the Mexico Olympics. I mean, things like that. We've seen a lot of that over the years, haven't we?
Yeah, and I mean, sports has a really fundamental role in the civil rights issue, and then you can trace that continued movement through women's rights, LGBTQ rights, social justice. The big difference now is social media. Athletes like LeBron James have a much bigger platform than Tommy Jones and John Carlos did at the Olympics. But they used to have to rely on the media to report their message. Now they can go directly to the fans. Also, this is sort of a watershed moment where the teams and the leagues have gotten involved. They always kind of left it to the athletes and institutionally buried their heads in the sand over social issues. But now you've got all this on-field messaging, and the NFL devoting a $250 million to combating systemic racism. So it's certainly amplified.
We're with Larry Olmsted, author of the book Fans, How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Understanding. Some of you might say, Larry Olmsted, yeah, best-selling author of Real Food, Fake Food. And Larry's back with us here this morning. Larry, I was fascinated by a number of things here about your book, but one of the things, obviously COVID-19 has been on our minds for now the last year, almost to the day now. And, obviously they've changed an awful lot. We never thought we'd see cardboard cutouts and sound machines at games, but we've seen a lot of that. How have these greatly altered games changed sports maybe forever for the sports fan as we talk about fans and happier and healthier and more understanding lives?
Well, I mean, to be honest, the experience of watching sports is somewhat diminished by having empty stadiums, and the fans at home have felt that way, and the players have felt that way. But on the other hand, having no sports basically in the world for over a month at the beginning of the pandemic was a much harder blow to take for sports fans, and that's why things like that Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, that came out had ratings just through the roof. Because it was the only game in town. People were watching, old NCAA basketball reruns. And when sports did come back, ratings initially were really high. They tapered off a little bit once all the leagues got going. But then fans did start to come back in, and like watching the Super Bowl in particular, the stadium was still only something like 35% full, but was enough people where it looked like there was a crowd, and you try to imagine it with no one in the stands. It's a much different experience. I do think it will take certainly a while to get back to normal, just like restaurants and travel and everything else. But just like, we talked about after 9/11, after some of these things, sports brings back a sense of normalcy. And to me, when you could go to a stadium and sit shoulder to shoulder among 50,000 people and high-five a stranger without worrying about, getting sick from it, that's, will be the moment when we're back as a society.
I was thinking about something. I was reading a little bit about you, and you talked about how, you went to the ballpark to see the Mets play with your dad because that's what you did, right? I mean, you spent time with your dad. I remember my dad, we were at a wedding one time, and it was really boring, and my dad said, come on, let's go to an Orioles game. We were down in Baltimore, and we went over to an Orioles game during the wedding, and we spent time together. And that was really special to me, and we got back in time for the reception to be over, and no one missed us. But, the idea of being there with your dad, now we have a lot of people, like you said, sitting home watching, for example, like a Tiger Woods special, or you watch the Michael Jordan special from another era for a lot of things, and a chance for dads to maybe explain to sons or daughters about that, and some of the other things that are shared experiences. I'm wondering if they're sharing the same kind of experience that you shared at a live event. I know physically it's different, and yet at the same time, is it still kind of a chance for us to kind of bond a little bit in a different kind of way?
It is, absolutely. And, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of sports fans around the world over the last several years, and everyone has this sort of shared experience of the family, remembering watching their first game with their mom or dad or grandparents,
right.
The multi-generationality of it. But, now, in general, the way we socialize has changed thanks to social media, and a lot of people still stay connected over sports, and one of the big changes has been the advent of fantasy sports. It has grown so fast, it almost seems like it's always been there, but it hasn't, and about 60 million people participate regularly just in the U.S. and Canada. And this has been a big connector during the pandemic because most people, they have different leagues built around affiliations, either their extended family or the people they went to college with or people they used to work with at another job, whatever it is, and often multiple leagues. And this is how, during these times, fans or no fans in the stands, the game's going on, the fantasy sports go on, that connectivity exists, and a lot of people spending a lot of time, on social media, staying connected with friends, and then at home as well, maybe co-managing their teams with their kids. In a lot of ways, I see fantasy sports becoming like this generation's Scrabble or Monopoly.
I think anything that opens up the world to more conversation where we're listening to each other, where we're connecting with each other, be it that way or other ways, I think is really a good thing. The name of the book, Fans, How Watching Sports Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Understanding. Larry Olmsted, it's by Algonquin Books, came out on March 2nd. And Larry, just for everybody out there, where can they buy the book right now?
They can get it at Amazon, any local bookstore. I have a website, sportsfansbook.com, not to sell the book, but has all the links, has an excerpt, and has a lot of reviews. So I think if they just want more info before they buy, sportsfansbook.com is the way to go.
Interesting to take a look at ourselves as fans and what drives us to be so nutty, and yet at the same time may have some really good outcomes that make us happier, healthier, and maybe not wiser, but what the heck, living better lives. Larry, really appreciate the time this morning. Thank you so much for taking it with us, and good luck with your book.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Larry Olmsted with us this morning here on WSBA.